Stephanie Gustafson is one of the Fort Bend Independent School District harp specialists, where she instructs harp students in both middle and high schools.
So I have been with Fort Bend ISD as a harp specialist for 3 years. Um, Fort Bend ISD is one of the few school districts in the country that has a harp program as part of its orchestra program. So because of that, harp is an option you can select as a sixth grader incoming, just like you can select violin, viola, cello, or bass. So a few years ago, the school district realized that they were kind of in over their heads, trying to support harp students and desperately wanting support. And if you look at the band world in Texas, there's precedent for that because there's always been percussion specialists. As long as there's been band programs, there's been percussion specialists. And so the orchestra directors kind of got together and they were like, well, this is a very similar need. Orchestra directors don't learn how to teach harpists in school. They learn how to teach bowed string instruments. And so they kind of rallied and found that they do, in fact, have enough harp students to justify hiring harp specialists. So I am a full-time harp specialist, meaning I receive a teacher contract every year. I'm on the teacher benefits, pension, things like that. Before that, I was a full-time freelancer. So up until COVID 2020, I was a full-time freelancer. I had about 30 private students, and then I did a lot of orchestra work. So I was principal with Baton Rouge Symphony, but then I also subbed and played second a lot with orchestras in New Orleans, Austin, El Paso, Corpus Christi, and then Houston Symphony when they needed to a lot of times. And then just supplemented all the ways that normal freelancers do, the occasional musical, the occasional opera, schools hire you, churches hire you, weddings, parties, things like that. And then in COVID, when everything shifted for everyone and everything went fully virtual, this opportunity came up, and I wasn't sure I wanted to teach full time, but I also knew that I had to figure something out. So it was kind of a cool time that the opportunity came up.
What is your dream performance venue?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of like really amazing international venues that I haven't performed at. If I stick to just like in the US, I grew up in the Chicago area. So I grew up going to Ravinia every summer, which for Houston is kind of similar to like maybe a combination of Miller and the Woodlands Pavilion. And Ravinia is where the Chicago Symphony has their summer season, and they do, I mean, just incredible, other performers perform there. So Ravinia, like just as a child, was always kind of a dream to play at. I actually have a few other internet or ones in the U.S., including Walt Disney Hall would be super cool, and then there's the Red Rocks Pavilion or amphitheater in Colorado. And then, I mean, really just like all the international opera houses. So Sydney Opera House, the opera houses in Oslo and Paris. Like there's just so many incredible venues. That would be a dream one day.
What is your least favorite thing about being a harpist?
Probably, I mean, moving it is a real pain. Like it's just like the logistical component of it that everyone kind of bristles against. It, is kind of a bummer. Actually, I'm going to change that answer. More than moving it, tuning. To the stress of playing outdoors. Oh, you're okay. You're okay. Hey, let me get your glasses. um the stress of playing outdoors and knowing like intonation's going to be really iffy within 10 minutes. So like Houston Symphony does outdoor performances every summer, and I did several last summer at the Woodlands. And at intermission I'm frantically trying to tune to fix it, and 10 minutes later it's already out of tune, and that's just really stressful. There's just nothing you can do about it mid concert. You can keep a single string in tune if a string breaks, but trying to keep the whole harp in tune doesn't work so well. So probably that's just a real. And then everyone in a chamber ensemble trying to tune to you is, just that component of it, I think, is you feel kind of helpless.
What do you love most about working with young harpists?
I mean, a lot of things. if I try to narrow it down to one specific thing, I think it's really cool seeing all the various ways that kids learn. So, I mean, my brain works the way it works, right? I've known how my brain works as long as I've been thinking about it. But when you start teaching, all of a sudden you are working with kids who, have totally different approaches, totally different ways of thinking about things. Um, and sometimes that's really cool and really inspiring. And sometimes you're like, how do I say this differently? Right. So I think it's always at minimum a cool challenge where you're like, how can I think about this in a way that makes sense to the student? But then sometimes it even like, inspires me in my practicing, like, oh, that student had a really cool fingering I had never thought about, or I really like that musical idea, or oh, that's a cool way of practicing it. That, I see how that passage, it would be really tricky for a student. What can I do? So it kind of motivates me in my own practicing, but it also, one, it gives me an appreciation for how hard this thing is that we're doing. When I see students struggle, I'm like, it is really hard. It is. And I think the longer you play, the more you kind of forget that you're doing this thing that's incredibly intricate and challenging. And so it's both kind of, reassuring and also a cool challenge.
Since you instruct both middle and high schoolers, what is a major difference among them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest difference is just kind of initiative and self-reliance. Hey, you're okay. You're okay. The cool thing about, being a herp specialist is that generally, generally, I get to work with students for hopefully 7 years. And the average teacher maybe works with them a year, orchestra directors 3 or 4, right? But I get to see them from the time they're, 12 to 18. And so the cool thing is seeing kids kind of take more initiative and more independence. I really, really like seeing students take charge of their musical development and their own education. But when they're in 6th grade, they're just not doing that. They're used to their parents checking in, making sure they're doing their homework, seeing what's in their backpack, kind of taking ownership of their development. And as they start to get into 9th and 10th grade, that really shifts. And I really like helping make that shift with kids. And sometimes I actually really have to help the parents too, because the parents are really used to being involved. And so maybe by the time they're in 8th grade or 9th grade, the kids and the parents haven't quite changed that dynamic. And so kind of trying to help coach, like, okay, we're now a teenager. And so the expectations are different. The teachers expect different things. And so getting to help bridge that gap is kind of a cool thing. But I would say that's for sure the biggest difference. Like, I'll tell a 6th grader, this is a thing that I need you to do. And they'll be like, oh, I'll tell my mom to do that. And I'll be like, no, 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 no. This is you. I'm asking you to do this. So each year seeing kids get that a little bit more is kind of a cool thing.
What is one thing you wish orchestra directors would do more to benefit harp programs across middle and high schools?
I think every orchestra director absolutely should take a semester of harp lessons. I think a lot of them, in theory, think they understand conceptually, right? They get how it works. Like they understand, oh, it's hard to read treble and bass clef at the same time. So like they get that. But I think the ways that it's different from piano are very hard to realize until you actually experience it. And two, all of the colors and the nuances of the instrument are so funky. And as you know, one of your orchestra directors was Miss Yip, and she took lessons for about 2 years. And every week was just kind of stunned at how hard it was, like newly stunned by different aspects of it that made it really tricky. And you probably even saw how it made her a better orchestra director, and just like so much more able to articulate what she's looking for and listening for, and also really able to just one, pick rep that works with harp students, and two, recognize maybe when something is a really big ask and other directors might not. But that took 2 years of kind of hard effort. And I don't expect, I mean, orchestra directors have a ton on their plates, a ton of responsibilities. So I don't think they can all do that. But I think if you can take a semester of lessons, the ways in which your harp teaching will be informed is amazing. So that is definitely, I mean, if you have access to a harp teacher and access to a harp, I think every director should try that for at least a semester.
In what ways do you believe students benefit from a harp specialist program?
I mean, I think Fort Bend is. I grew up in Illinois, and so the orchestra program is really different. And I think when I start explaining kind of the ways that Texas's music education is set up, even things like TMEA, but like solo ensemble, all these UIL kind of events are so different down here. They're so regulated in a way that they aren't in any other state I'm familiar with. And so sometimes it's kind of hard explaining all the ways that it's like really, really vital. But there's so many logistics both to the harp and also to all of the events that go into UIL functions for Texas. Um, and so there are days where I'm like, how did they do this without us? Like there's just so many things to think about. So even just like the number of events that are happening off campus that you need to provide instruments for, those logistics are very, very tricky. And so that kind of stuff I think is like really, really useful to have a harp specialist kind of managing. But even just like being able to take the time with sixth graders to teach them how to tune, how to change strings, how to move harps safely. I mean, orchestra directors can do that. They all pretty much know how to do that, but having the dedicated time to work with kids on that, it's just hard when they're also trying to teach a beginner violin class of 30 kids at the same time. So that kind of stuff is really useful. I mean, just in general, being able to do sectionals on harp stuff that would totally get missed in a regular class, but then being able to take care of like do extra opportunities like harp ensemble. And I can write parts for middle school classes, things like that. I mean, there's just so many things, big and small, that are able to be done on a much, much more successful scale with harp specialists.
As former harpist of the Baton Rouge Symphony Orchestra and Annapolis Symphony, what were some of your favorite orchestra pieces you have performed?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons and tons of just incredible rep that I feel really lucky to have gotten to play. If I look at just the last couple seasons, playing principal on Planets with the Houston Symphony was incredible. One, the piece is just superb. Overall, the whole piece is just incredible. Two, the harp writing by Holst is spectacular. It's incredibly good harp writing. But then three, I also got to perform it with under the conductor Gemma New, who is young, but just one of the most inspiring conductors I've ever worked with. And I haven't gotten to work with a lot of female conductors. And so that whole week was like walking on a cloud. It was just the coolest experience. I also got to do a giant Mahler symphony. I played second on it, but it was for Andres's last concert as music director of Houston Symphony. So it's a very sentimental experience for a lot of people, and it's just an epic work with choir and soprano and mezzo soprano soloists. So you're doing this gigantic work. You have two sets of timpani, two harps, a whole choir. I mean, it's just a whole, everything that Mahler does in epic scale, but also a really, really meaningful experience to so many who felt really, really inspired by Andres. So those were two very recently. But another really cool piece that I got to do in New Orleans, I actually played the score for E.T., the John Williams score with the film overhead. And I've done a lot of films, but E.T., because it's so ethereal and there's so much, celestial kind of music, it really heavily features the harp. You could almost call it like a concerto. It is really like just a giant harp part. Sometimes the harp is actually put in front of the orchestra during the performance of that. And so that experience, just 2 hours of beautiful harp writing, difficult, cool rhythms, trying to make it sound like improvisatory and free, but also being with a click track was a really, really cool challenge. That was actually the first film score I'd ever done. So that was kind of an incredible experience. But there's tons. I mean, the Brooke Scottish Fantasy is incredible. That was the first time I did that. Was just like also kind of a life-changing experience. There's tons, but I feel like every year there's 2 or 3 where I'm like, wow, this I feel so lucky to get this opportunity. What a dream come true.
Lastly, what general advice would you offer to younger harpists?
I think something that I wish I had really, really taken to heart, that I don't think is advice you need necessarily, but for most harpists, consistency is key. So, I mean, consistent and really intentional practicing, if even if that means just 20 minutes a day, right? But 20 minutes a day where you put your phone away, where you are really, really focused. You sit down, you have a specific goal, a thing you need to accomplish, and you really give it your all for those 20 minutes. If you do that every day for as long as you have access to a harp, I get it. People go out of town. Oh, honey, she's not even crying. She's just talking. You're fine. I both didn't really practice super consistently, but also didn't practice with a lot of focus. And so I think really, if you're thinking, what do I want to get done in a year? So what does that mean? What do I need to get done each month? And then breaking it down even further. If I'm going to get that done this month, what do I need to get done each week in order to do that? And then what do I need to get done each day to do that? So if I had just put that, I mean, honestly, it seems like a lot to think about, but I don't think it actually takes that much time. It just takes a little bit of self-reflection. So if I had really done that, taken the time to reflect and then kind of come up with a plan, I feel like it's really overwhelming to be practicing because you're like, oh my gosh, I have so much to get done. But if you're sitting there and you're kind of getting up and getting snacks and checking your phone, you're going to get nothing done in 2 hours. Whereas if you are like, I'm in it for these 20, 30 minutes, it really, really does make a huge difference. And I see how much, high schoolers have on their plates. You're being pulled in hundreds of directions, in all of your classes, all of your activities, all of the social things you want to do. And all of them are wonderful. So I get it. Your time is really precious and really, really valuable. And so it's like, I'm not asking you to sit down every night for 2 hours, but just like you have 20 minutes of math homework every day, 20 minutes of heart practicing every day can just skyrocket, I think, your development. And then if you want to put in extra time on the weekends, go for it. But just really commit to consistency, and intentionality.